Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. Let me start with a question that is far more important than most organizations realize. Is AI making your people more capable or just more dependent? Because right now, in company after company, leaders are tracking adoption, usage, speed, and output. They're asking whether teams are using tools, whether productivity is up, whether work is getting done faster. But there's a deeper question almost nobody is asking. What is happening to human capability underneath that output? What happens to judgment when AI does more of the thinking? What happens to pattern recognition when people stop generating first draft ideas themselves? What happens to real expertise when professionals become excellent at reviewing answers, but weaker at producing them on their own? That's what this episode is all about. Today, I want to connect learning science, behavior science, AI research, and real-world leadership practice to answer one of the most important questions facing organizations right now. Are you using AI to sharpen capability or quietly replace it? Because those are not the same thing. And the difference between them may determine which organizations actually get smarter in the years ahead and which ones simply become more efficient on the surface while growing weaker underneath. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders who inspire us to think differently and lead better. Through candid conversations and expert perspectives, we dive into the challenges, breakthroughs, and practical lessons that shape exceptional leadership. Let me start with something that's happened to almost every person listening, and that almost nobody has connected to what's happening inside their organization right now. You drive to a place dozens of times. You know the route, but you still use GPS, and you follow it without thinking. Then one day, the phone dies, the signal drops, and you realize you have no idea how to get there without GPS. The route that you've driven many times, gone. That's not a sign of bad memory. That's what happens when a tool does your thinking for you long enough and causes the capability that you should have been building in the background to quietly atrophy instead. Researchers at the University College of London documented this on brain imaging studies. Heavy GPS reliance measurably reduces activity in the hippocampus, the part of your brain responsible for spatial navigation. The tool didn't just replace a task, it began replacing the underlying capability as well. So ask yourself, what is AI doing to the professional judgment, pattern recognition, and adaptive expertise your organization depends on? That is a question this episode is built around, and I hope by the end of it, you are going to look at your AI investment and your own daily habits with AI differently. McKinsey last year released its 2025 State of AI report. They surveyed nearly 2,000 executives across 105 countries. 88% of organizations now use AI in at least one business function, and yet only 6% qualify as genuine AI high performers, which are organizations achieving meaningful, measurable bottom-line impact with AI. Gartner reports that 72% of CIOs, nearly 3 out of 4, say their organizations are breaking even or even losing money on their AI investment. 88% adoption, 6% transformation, 72% either breaking even or losing money. Most leaders hear those numbers and reach for a technology explanation. Well, Charles, they must be using the wrong tools or have poor implementation. And while some of that is true for some of the organizations, there's a different root cause explanation for the majority, one that is grounded in learning science and behavior science that most companies are entirely missing. The gap between the 88% adoption and the 6% transformation is not a technology problem. It's a human capability design problem. Organizations are building workflows that get work done faster. That part is working. But in optimizing for speed and output, they have systematically bypassed the cognitive processes that develop the people doing the actual work. So results are going up, but the capability behind those results, the judgment, pattern recognition, and adaptive expertise is not. And here's what makes this so dangerous. You can't see it happening. Not on an AI adoption dashboard, not in a quarterly output review, not in performance ratings. The gap between what your people can produce with AI and what they can produce without it, it's invisible until the moment it becomes critical. Before we discuss the gap and a way to close it, I want to discuss the strongest case on the other side, because it deserves real engagement, not a straw man. Ethan Mollick, a Wharton professor, is one of Time's most influential people in AI. He's also the best-selling author of the book Co-Intelligence, which is probably the book your leadership team has already read. His research in the book with Boston Consulting Group is one of the most rigorous studies of AI and knowledge work ever introduced. In that study, he looks at 758 BCG consultants, real consulting tasks, randomized into two groups, one that uses AI, one that doesn't use AI. Now, the results, consultants using AI completed 12% more tasks, 25% faster, and produced output rated 40% of higher quality than the control group not using AI. Lower performing consultants benefited the most with a 43% improvement. Even the best consultants benefited, but by only 17%. Mollick's conclusion: AI functions best as a thinking partner, what he calls the cyborg model, where humans and AI integrate their work continuously, each doing what they do best. He argues this makes humans genuinely more capable, more creative, and more effective. And I agree with him. That argument is correct. And it is incomplete in the way that learning science makes it precise. Co-intelligence describes what the destination looks like. It doesn't fully answer the behavioral question: what specific conditions cause working with AI to actually build human capability over time, rather than quietly diminishing it? And here's the part of the BCG study that gets less attention in the business press. The same study that showed those productivity gains also found that for tasks outside the jagged frontier, which are tasks where AI's capabilities don't help or apply, consultants using AI perform 19% worse by using it than by not using it. The researchers also documented something they called miscalibrated trust. Professionals over-relying on AI precisely where it is weakest, unable to distinguish the tasks where AI helps from the tasks where AI can hurt. And a follow-up study found something even more alarming. When consultants tried to fact-check AI output, when they pushed back, asked questions, pointed out errors, the AI didn't acknowledge its limitations. It doubled down. The AI apologized and then restated its flawed recommendation with more supporting data, structured reasoning, and a confident tone. And unfortunately, the professionals who were most dependent on AI were the least equipped to catch it when it was wrong. So Mollick's research shows AI can make you dramatically better inside that frontier. What it also shows is, if you look carefully, is that dependency on AI outside the frontier makes you worse. The difference between those two outcomes is not the tool, it's how the human engages with it. I wanted to give you 3 examples of this pattern, 2 historical and 1 from my own work, because examples make the abstract visceral. Example 1, the autopilot problem. Commercial aviation has been grappling with this dynamic for years. Modern aircraft can fly themselves with extraordinary precision. Autopilot handles the vast majority of flight time. And the documented result, studied by the FAA, the NTSB, and aviation safety researchers worldwide, is that the manual flying skills of commercial pilots have decreased. They've measurably degraded. 2 crashes brought this into a devastating focus: the 2009 air disaster near Buffalo and the Air France disaster over the Atlantic. Both involved experienced crews who, when automation failed and manual control was required, they couldn't do it. Not because they were incompetent, but because the skill had atrophied from disuse. As a result, the NTSB changed pilot training requirements and mandated more manual flying time, specifically recognizing that a tool doing the work for you is not the same as being able to do it yourself. Example 2. In 1997, Garry Kasparov lost to IBM's Deep Blue. It was the first time that a world chess champion was defeated by a computer. What came after is the most instructive part of the story. The chess world experimented with what they called centaur chess, human players partnering with computers. And for a period, the best centaur teams beat both humans alone and AI alone. The combination was more powerful than either. But here's where it gets interesting and directly relevant to what Mollick's research is showing. The centaur players who thrived were the ones who used AI to sharpen their game. They'd form their own read on the board first. Then they consulted the engine. The gap between their thinking and the machines became the learning. The players who simply deferred to the computer's recommendations, who plugged in a position and followed the output, well, they lost the ability to see the board independently. When the tool wasn't available or when it was wrong, they had nothing to fall back on. Same tool, same access, completely different outcomes, determined entirely by the order in which the human engaged their own thinking relative to AI. Example 3, what I've seen. I want to share something from my own work because I think honesty from personal observation is more valuable than another research citation. Over the past 2 years, I've been in rooms with leadership teams at organizations that have rolled out AI broadly and enthusiastically, and I keep seeing the same thing. When I ask a group of senior managers to walk me through their analysis of a strategic problem before they open any tool, there's a pause. That wasn't there 2 years ago, a kind of what you may call a reaching, not because they're unintelligent, but because the cognitive muscle that generates first draft thinking, that reaches into existing knowledge and constructs a starting position, that muscle's getting less and less practice. They can evaluate AI output fluently. They can refine and improve it. But generating the raw material themselves, that's getting harder to do. And they don't often realize it until I create conditions where they have to. The second thing I've noticed is when I ask the teams to work on problems together before consulting AI. The quality of the thinking in the room is different than when they each come prepared with an AI assisted draft. When everyone else has consulted the same AI beforehand, they tend to arrive at converging starting points. And Mollick's own research on cyborgs versus centaurs is now documenting this at scale. The way AI uses patterns affects not only individual productivity, but diversity of thinking within teams. I want to discuss 3 research frameworks that explain it. First, the generation effect. First documented in 1978, replicated hundreds of times since. Information you generate yourself, even imperfectly, even with struggle, is retained dramatically better than information you receive passively. When you work through a problem and construct an answer, you encode it into long-term memory, and it becomes part of how you think. When you receive an answer from a textbook, a colleague, or AI, well, you may understand it in the moment, but the encoding is far weaker. Cognitive psychology calls this the illusion of fluency. You feel like you know it, but test yourself 3 weeks later under pressure, it often isn't there. This is why pilots freeze when the autopilot fails. This is why chess players who always defer to the AI engine lose that board vision. And this is what happens in organizations where AI consistently goes first. The second framework is Zimmerman's self-regulation model. Barry Zimmerman spent decades building the most comprehensive model of how humans develop genuine capability. His model describes every meaningful performance attempt as a 3-phase cycle. The first phase is forethought, where the learner sets their own goals and takes ownership of the problem before they begin. The second phase is performance, where the learner monitors their progress and makes real-time adjustments. They develop this internal feedback loop, which is really what separates people who improve from repetition versus people who just repeat the same thing. And then the third phase is self-reflection, where after the task, the learner asks themselves, what can I do differently next time? When AI goes first, when it proposes a strategy, monitors the execution, and produces the output, all 3 of these phases are partially or completely bypassed. The human's role becomes editorial. Zimmerman's model predicts the result with precision. And he states, this pattern doesn't build capability. It produces tool dependency, which looks identical to expertise until the moment the tool is not there. The third and final framework is the 2-category framework, because not all capabilities are equally at risk. The distinction is critical. Let's first talk about Category 1 capabilities. Those are the ones where the output is the value. The results matter. The process of producing it has no independent worth. So in this case, competitive advantage doesn't require that a human develop mastery by doing it. So in this case, automate these tasks aggressively. The efficiency gains are real and the capability cost is minimal. Category 2 capabilities, on the other hand, are the ones where the value lives not just in the output, but in the judgment, relationship, and expertise built through the process of producing it. So, for example, strategic analysis that requires your pattern recognition, or a client conversation that requires your credibility. Now, most leaders hear Category 1 and Category 2, and they immediately think, I get it. But they often misclassify them. and the error almost always runs in the same direction. They underestimate how much judgment is embedded in the work that looks routine. So here are 3 questions to help you classify any capability correctly. First, can the output be fully specified in advance? If you can write a complete specification of what good output looks like before the work begins, then automate it. If the value lives in how the output adapts to conditions you couldn't anticipate, well, that's a category 2. Protect it. Second question, does the competitive advantage come from the result or from the relationship and the trust built in producing it? A contract, category 1. The relationship that got you that contract, category 2. A market analysis, category 1. The judgment of the analyst who has done this in a specific context for 10 years, well, that's category 2. The third question, if your people stopped doing this work for the next 6 to 12 months and then they had to do it under real pressure, what would the cost of that be to you? If the answer is nothing, then automate it completely. If the answer is significant, develop it deliberately and protect that development with the same discipline you apply to any strategic investment. Run those 3 questions against the 5 AI integrations your organization is most proud of right now. I'd be willing to bet at least one of them is misclassified. So let me make this operational because this is where it gets practical. There are 2 fundamentally different ways people use AI. They produce nearly identical outputs. They look identical on every adoption dashboard, but their effects in 12 to 24 months are completely different. The first is the replacement pattern, and it goes something like this. You encounter a problem, you ask AI, you review its output, and you submit. Your cognitive contribution is editorial. The thinking was outsourced. Productivity goes up, but capability month by month quietly atrophies. The next is the sharpening pattern, and it goes something like this. Encounter a problem, form your own analysis first. It could be a rough analysis, incomplete, but put forth your best current thinking on it. Then bring it to AI to challenge it. What did I miss? What's the strongest argument against my position? Where's my reasoning weakest? Compare AI's position to yours and update where it's earned. Then submit. In this case, both productivity and capability goes up. In fact, they compound. Think back to the chess players. Centaur players who thrived were the ones using the sharpening pattern. They formed their own read on the board, committed to a position. Then they consulted the AI engine and asked them, why does the computer see it differently? What am I not seeing? That gap between their thinking and the machines became the learning. The players who deferred immediately, who went straight to the AI engine before forming their own position, lost the ability to see the board independently. Same tool, same access, but the order of operations determined everything. This is exactly what Mollick's cyborg model is pointing toward, and the behavioral science makes it precise. It's not enough to integrate AI into your workflow. The sequence of human thinking relative to AI assistance determines whether your skills are going to grow stronger or gradually weaken with every single interaction. And this applies at a team level too. When every team member arrives at a collaborative session having consulted previously AI, their starting points start to converge. The productive disagreement that makes teams genuinely smarter, the hidden profiles that one person holds that the group needs, gets compressed before the conversation even begins. A team that reviews AI output together is not thinking together. So let me leave you with 5 things to do this week. First, ask your team consistently without judgment, did you think first or did you go to AI first? That single question services the replacement pattern before it becomes invisible. You cannot change a pattern you haven't named. 2, on any task where understanding matters, not just output, produce your own thinking before opening the tool, even if it's rough, even if it's incomplete. The attempt encodes the learning. This is the generation effect in practice. 3, when AI exposes a gap in your thinking, resist the reflex to ignore it, but rather get curious and question to find out the reason why. That friction is the system working. The difficulty is the learning. It's not a design flaw. Organizations normalizing productive struggle are the ones building adaptive expertise. 4, periodically remove the AI scaffold. Create conditions where people perform without AI as the default first resource, not to punish them, but to tell the truth about where their capability actually stands. If you never test unassisted performance, you don't know what you have. And 5, track what people can produce without AI, not just what they can produce with it. That gap between those two numbers is your real capability metric. So as we close, I want to get back to Ethan Mollick. He was right that AI can make you more capable, more creative, more effective. The research that he has in his book with BCG proved it. The chess example I discussed demonstrated it. The organizations building their capabilities with the sharpening pattern, they're living it. But the tool doesn't make the choice. You do. So once again, getting back to that question that I posed to you at the beginning of this episode. Are you building capability or just building dependency? And maybe let's make it even more personal. When you use AI, are you using it to sharpen your thinking or to replace that part of the work that would have made you better? That question changes everything. Thanks for listening to the Good Leadership Podcast. If this episode challenged your thinking, share it with a colleague, send it to your team, and subscribe so you don't miss future conversations on leadership, learning, and performance. Until next time, lead well. I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.